It's time to drop in my new engine and transmission. To start, I lifted up the engine with this very cheap hoist. I installed the Holley engine mounts, which are apparently engine mounts for a 4th generation Camaro. The engine stand mount is removed so we can access the crank. So normally you'd pull off the old pilot bearing with this puller tool, but my LS1 was from an automatic car, so instead I need to install a pilot bearing. Go ahead and get the bearing started, then use something round and flat to install the bearing. This deep socket was scarring the bearing a little bit, so I switched to this chunk of titanium bar stock that I had laying around. Nice and flush, and the bearing spins freely. Before I dropped the engine in, I had to redo my front brake lines. Since I'm using an F-body oil pan with the Holley kit, I had to relocate my brake line to the front of the crossmember. I may have gotten a little carried away with the brake lines, but this is how I mounted them on both sides. I almost maxed out my cherry picker to get enough height to clear the core support. The engine is slowly dropped in. Align the engine mounts and then install the bolts. This is going to take a lot of wiggling and a lot of cursing to get those stupid holes to line up. And you can see my front end lowering down with the weight of the engine. And next up is the transmission crossmember, but these inner subframe connectors are in the way, so off they go. Some PPE and a grinder does the work. Any cuts that are too deep are welded and then ground flush. A nice coat of Por 15 finishes the deal. Install the crossmember and mark the 2 undrilled holes. Drill the marked holes to full size. These doubler plates are installed inside the frame rails of the car. The shorter end faces the rear of the car with the nut facing upwards. Use a magnet stick to install the doubler plate. I drilled and installed a countersink bolt to hold the doubler in place. I don't want to go messing around with a loose doubler later on, so this way it's always in the spot that I need it to be. Looks like all the bolts fit. Now onto the clutch. I went with an LS7 clutch with an aluminum flywheel. Since this isn't a street car, the aluminum flywheel won't be an issue. Torque the flywheel bolts to the factory specs. Loctite is a good option here. A quick solvent spray and the flywheel is now clean. Install the clutch disc and alignment pin. Please note that the disc has a front and rear orientation. This ridiculously heavy pressure plate is installed and torqued to the factory specs. Temporarily install the bell housing and measure the clutch fingers. Install the new throwout bearing. Press it all the way forward and then measure from the face of the T56. Subtract the two numbers that you just measured and it should be about 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch. Installing this transmission was quite the bear, so I don't have any good footage. Temp install the transmission crossmember. I used some foam as a spacer just for now. Since my car was an automatic, a hole needs to be cut for the shifter. A cutoff wheel and some patience resulted in a fairly good hole. The Tremec stock shifter that comes with this transmission feels kinda meh, so I added a TIC 4th generation shifter a little later on. Remove the crossmember and install the polyurethane mount. Now to the torque arm. I had to add 3/8 of an inch of spacers to the poly mount. I had to cut the T56 a little bit, and I had to enlarge the rear torque arm mount holes to get it all to align properly. The car is at max droop and on the bump stops, and the torque arm still clears the tunnel. This is perfect. Now my driveshaft can go in. I had a 31 spline yoke with a conversion U-joint installed on my aluminum driveshaft alongside a quick balance check. Some orange Loctite and a torque wrench and the shaft is in. This particular shaft is an aftermarket piece, but it's the same length as a 3rd or 4th generation drive shaft. For anyone that stayed this long, thanks for watching. If you want, you can support me on Patreon, and make sure to follow me on Instagram.